This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. Here we are, and the election just keeps barreling down on us. And I got to say, I feel like the word that keeps coming up is unstable. People are feeling unstable. They feel that races are unstable. They don't know what to think. They don't know how to predict it. They don't know what polls to trust. Obviously, some of this is exaggerated and some things that typically happen with every election. But I do think that there is something to what defines an unstable race. And so when I think of instability, I think of Nathan Gonzales, our friend at Inside Elections and our campaign analyst here at Roll Call. Just
tough,
kidding, Nathan.
Tough but fair.
Tough but fair. Yeah, well, it's like a Fox News interview, right? But I do feel like, people are getting stressed, and obviously the stakes are big in the election, whether it's at the presidential level, governors, Senate, House races, and so forth. Things feel unstable, even though the presidential race is a stable, unstable race, right? we knew that it was going to be close, going down to the wire once Harris got into the race. It seems like, and we saw the first batch of polling, but that doesn't mean that there aren't some races out there, particularly in the House and Senate, that are unstable. And so I want to just bounce some of these races, talk about some of these races, because I think that there are some truly unstable things that we're seeing, aren't they?
Right. And I think defining what does unstable mean is probably a good place to start. And this is in the shadow of what I think is a very stable presidential race. I mean, if you look at the polling after the reset with Harris to the top of the ticket rather than Biden, it's been very stable. If you look at a 538 polling average or something, it's just kind of two parallel lines, just tracking no matter what happens. And so I would regard the presidential race as stable. Now, what's an unstable race? To me, it's when the two parties have different views of the race. Some of you might think, well, don't they have different views of every race? And actually, most of the time, they will agree within a couple of percentage points about where a race stands. But there are a few where there is, it's like someone's polling Mars and someone's polling Venus, it feels like.
I actually, that's a really good way of putting it, because, there are always people, candidates who kind of get some momentum at the end. There are always candidates who fizzle. And some of this, it may seem, kind of like it may be sort of shocking to people who thought that they had a stronger candidate than they did at the end. But I do agree, like, for instance, when you change your rating for Montana Senate with John Tester to tilt Republican, this is something that everybody sees. And this is an example, I think, of a stable race where this race has had a through line where it has progressively gotten further away from John Tester and towards Tim Sheehy, his Republican opponent. And whether that's because Republicans are coming home, whether that's because Sheehy's a good candidate, debatable, whether it's because Tester is just, we're not as welcome, whatever the thing is, it is a stable line, and both parties agree that, yes, this is Tim Sheehy is kind of in the driver's seat in this.
Right. We're arguing about degrees rather than kind of the overall structure of the race.
Right. And in Ohio, we figured that regardless of who Sherrod Brown was going to run against, it was going to be a toss-up all the way to Election Day. And that's sort of borne out. And both parties see it as like, yes, this is a toss-up race. Brown seems to be, favored slightly right now, but we still have a few days to go, and you never know what will happen. But when, as you were saying, when party operatives, when pollsters, when the campaigns disagree about the very basics of what we're seeing, I think that is a good starting point. I like your definition of unstable. And I think, right now, to me, the most interesting race going on in the Senate right now is actually in Nebraska, the Class 1 election. There are actually two Senate races in Nebraska right now, both Both incumbents are up. Deb Fischer is up because her 6-year term is at an end. Pete Ricketts is up because he is running in a special election to fill out the last part of Ben Sass's Class 2 term. So Ricketts is running away with it. I mean, he will win easily. Fischer is running against an independent named Dan Osborne, and it just seems like somewhere in the last few weeks, all of a sudden, we see poll after poll after poll. Now, some of them are internal, and some of them are partisan, but it shows Osborne with this like growing momentum that seemed to come out of nowhere.
Right. And he would argue he's been here for a while, and actually we interviewed him in an office in a conference room just behind you a little bit months ago. And he'd laid out the case. It just seemed far-fetched, right? I mean, on paper it kind of sounded good, but also difficult to enact. But then it was clear. What's weird about this race is that both parties agreed about where the race was a few weeks ago, which is that it was basically even, or Fischer was barely ahead, and Republicans knew they had work to do.
Which is in itself kind of surprising, right? Because this is a heavily Republican state. The Democrats decided not to run a candidate, to just let Osborne have a free lane. And so even that is kind of interesting, right?
Right. And Osborne being an independent, being a mechanic and a local, labor leader, he is tapping into an appetite for someone who is not a politician.
Right.
And that combination of an outsider running against a politician, and a politician who maybe hasn't been as agile as what she could have been, and hasn't raised as much money or been as present. And so there's that combination, those ingredients have added up to a more competitive race than expected. Now, where the instability is where does the race stand today? Because Republicans believe that they have corrected the race, that it is now more in line with Nebraska being a red state, help with Trump endorsement ad, and putting some negatives on Osborne. So they believe that now Fischer is back with a lead. Now, and Democrats disagree, and Osborne disagree. Like, they believe that this is either even or Osborne is in the lead, and so that's where, coming to the last 2.5 weeks, I don't think it's as simple as, well, just average out the two. It kind of feels like someone's right and someone's very wrong, and we're trying to figure that out right now.
And this has huge implications, because if things were to hold for the most part in the map right now, like we start out for the most part with a 50-50 Senate, because Joe Manchin's seat that he's vacating to retire is very likely a solid Republican seat. And so we're already at 50-50, which means that whoever wins the presidency, their vice president breaks ties and enables a power sharing agreement that allows the party in the White House to be in control of the Senate. If Republicans were to lose Fischer's seat, if they were to win, if they were to pick up West Virginia and pick up Montana, but then lose Fischer's seat, that would be, I think that some people would cry.
Yeah. Well, yet another way that Republicans have grasped defeat from the jaws of victory. Is that how they find new way every cycle? Republicans find new ways to lose winnable races, that's certainly a scenario. And is Nebraska now a better chance, a better kind of Democratic opportunity than Texas and Florida? Certainly better than Florida, might even be better than Texas. And so that's something that we just didn't expect to be talking about 2.5 weeks from the election.
Right. And also, there's other stuff going on too, right? I mean, like, Nebraska gets in a more attention than you would think. It's not a swing state on the presidential level, because of the way that it allots electoral votes. I mean, that each congressional district allots the whoever wins that district. And so in Omaha, the Omaha-based, first district, the blue dot, they call it, this Harris is, in the kind of a little bit in the driver's seat. You have just downgraded Don Bacon, the Republican incumbent's race chances there, to, I believe it's tilt Democratic for Tony Vargas, his Democratic opponent.
Yep. Correct.
And so, that sort of dynamic could play into what happens at the Senate level. It is again, the very definition of unstable. Like, how is this going to affect these things? So definitely.
And that electoral college vote could matter because if Trump wins of the swing states, if he wins Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina, Harris wins Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, that gets her to 270, including that one electoral college vote. But I know that
269, I believe. It gets her to 269. And the Nebraska one would get her to 270.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you. What I was saying then, though, is talking to a couple of Democrats, they believe that Republicans will find a way to get that electoral college vote to Trump as far as a winner take all. Now, they haven't had the votes in the legislature to change that law up to this point, or they would have done it by now. But I know that there are just some skeptical Democrats that say we cannot let it come down to that because they believe Republicans will find a way to push that. And then it goes to 269. It goes to the House. Trump would win in that scenario because Republicans control more state delegations than Democrats.
All right, let's not go down too much of the presidential rabbit hole.
Talk about instability.
Talk about instability. Or the post-election is the unstable part. But I'm glad you mentioned Texas because I feel like this is another example using your definition of people, the two campaigns, the two operatives, like the two spheres that are making this race happen, with the money, with the ground game, with strategy and so forth, also disagree about the basics of this race. And, I think that, at this point, I it seems like Cruz, leads in almost every poll you see, but Allred keeps Colin Allred, so Ted, I should back up. Ted Cruz is running for re-election in 2024. He won narrowly in 2018 by about 3 points, a little over 3 points against Beto O'Rourke in a very high-profile Senate race. And then, Colin Allred is a former professional football player. He's a member of the House. He worked in the Obama White House. He's raised gobs of money. And he keeps polling close enough for some polls, recent polls, to be close to the margin of error. And that in itself, sometimes that's not, like telling you a lot. What the thing that I keep always paying attention to is if you're an incumbent, particularly an incumbent that is as well known as somebody like Ted Cruz, and you're still at like 45%, you have some ground to make up with the electorate, because that means that they know who you are and they're still not willing to say they're voting for you.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. And in this case, I think Republicans believe that Cruz is doing a little bit better than maybe most of the public polling, that he's up mid to high single digits. Democrats, I think, believe Allred is close. I mean, he is running neck and neck with Cruz. I remain a little bit skeptical that Harris is going to do well enough to Texas to decrease the number of crossover voters that Allred needs in order to win. I mean, right now we're looking at the scenario that maybe Allred is doing better than Harris, and that is technically possible. I just don't know.
This is playing out over other states too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in Arizona, Ruben Gallego is doing better than Harris. The Jackie Rosen's doing better than Harris in Nevada, at least in polling. I mean, it's not a completely out of left field, thought.
Yeah. I mean, he will do better. It's just how much better and how close is Harris able to keep it at the top of the ticket, because she's been able to get close to Biden's 2020 mark in a few places, but falling short in others. And so if she can get to what Biden, I think it was only 5 points, I want to say, in 20, I should know this. I do this for a living. Biden only lost Texas by about 5. Someone can correct me in the comments. But so if she can maybe narrow that a bit, I just don't know that she's going to be able to do that based on how she's doing overall. She could still win, but she's not blowing it out compared to Biden's 2020 numbers.
Right. And she
could win overall, not win Texas.
Right. Yeah. And again, getting back to Allred and Cruz, I mean, like this, the overall partisan bent of Texas does favor Republicans. It's almost like, the same situation in Florida, a few years ago, not now, but a few years ago. Florida always seemed like it was within reach, but it was just a teeny bit out of reach for Democrats. And the issue is that it's just so expensive to campaign there because of all the different media markets, because of how just expensive it is to traverse a state that big with as diverse and complicated as it is. And so investing in Texas or investing in Florida doesn't give you the same kind of return as investing in North Carolina or Pennsylvania or Michigan or other expensive places like that. But again, go ahead.
I was saying, to Allred's credit, he's been able to raise a lot of money and even more than Beto, I believe, without getting that national brand that Beto was bringing with him, that he's been able to get the money, push and not be labeled as a national Democrat. But he's still running in Texas.
Yeah. Let's talk about a couple of House races. My home state of Arizona, and actually the congressional district where I grew up, Arizona 2. This is the Verde Valley, Prescott, Cottonwood, that whole area. This is represented by Eli Crane. You've done some polling that shows that this race is close, which is amazing to me because Yavapai County, which forms the kind of the basis of it, has some Democratic areas like Sedona, but actually it's divided a little bit, up there. I mean, it's not enough to offset the population centers of Prescott and places like that, and the Verde Valley, which are overwhelmingly Republican.
Yeah, so we've been partnering with Noble Predictive Insights based in Arizona. This is our sixth House poll, and this one was fun and an adventure because it wasn't a toss-up or right in the core of the battlefield. We have it rated as likely Republican, and it shows that Eli Crane tied at 42 with former Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez. And that is, and what makes me, and so that's kind of a shocker. Wow, this race that no one's really talking about, and the congressman is tied at 42. So is there something shifty going on with the sample? But it shows that Trump is winning the district handily, because it is a Republican leaning district by the numbers. But then when you move to the Senate, it shows people are willing to split their tickets because Ruben Gallego is winning, running ahead of Kari Lake in the Senate race. And Kari Lake is incredibly unpopular in this district, even though this is a Republican-leaning district. If you're looking for good news for Republicans, it's that with Trump showing that Trump is winning the district, that Crane just needs to raise his name ID and get up to that Trump, get all the Trump supporters to vote for him. What is interesting, though, is that Nez is not a typical candidate, right? Being a Native American tribal leader in the district could carry weight, not just with the Navajo. There are multiple tribes in the district. And so does that give him special entry into part of the electorate that otherwise wouldn't be available to just an off-the-shelf Democrat?
Yeah, I think, right before I moved out here in 1998, I taught on the Navajo reservation in Rock Point, at Rock Point Community School. This is in the Four Corners area. And tribal politics are really interesting, and they're not. It's not an across the board Democratic constituency, and some of it is quite literally getting people to the polls and giving them a reason to vote. And when I just returned from a trip to Arizona, and when I saw that Mark Ruffalo and different people were in Arizona, like on the Navajo reservation, like trying to get people to vote and kind of using his celebricate status for liberal causes to get people to the polls, I thought, okay, that's interesting. I mean, that's an interesting play. And I remember thinking this in another part of the state in the early days of Gallego's campaign for the Senate, where he went down to the southern part of the state to a reservation that very few people, visit near the Kofa Proving Range, outside of Tucson, in this place called Sells. And, this is a desolate part of Arizona. And I thought, okay, he's obviously touching base with different constituencies that get forgotten by people who run statewide. And I thought, all right, this is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And what will be interesting now after, we just released this poll, just released it. And what is subsequently what's going to happen? Because I think there's probably going to be people taking their own temperature of the race and do their own polling and say, okay, is this legit or not? And then you have this dynamic where Crane was one of the handful of House Republicans to help oust Kevin McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a Republican establishment who wants to hold the majority, right? That's the goal, but yet really no love for Eli Crane and no desire to go out of their way to spend money or help him, but yet, ultimately it comes down to seats and holding the majority. And so that's going to play out over the next week or so.
And it's getting late. If you find out that you're in trouble, less than 3 weeks from election day. I mean, Arizona has they started their early voting last week. It is an engaged electorate, and not just at the presidential level, but at the Senate level, at the two, kind of close races with Juan Ciscomani and David Schweikert, the incumbents who are facing, potentially tough Democratic opponents. Even the legislature. I mean, it's kind of nuts. Like, the Republicans have these tiny margins in the legislature. They're up, by like one seat in the Senate and 2 in the House or something, or 1 seat in each, chamber, which is just wow. I mean, so people they're truly engaged. And, if you watch television, like my mom does, every commercial is a political ad.
Yeah, and Nez is one of many Democratic House candidates who just raising tremendous amount of money. He actually, as of taping this, has some broadcast TV ads, even in the expensive Phoenix market, whereas Crane, I think up to this point, has not been on broadcast. He's been on cable and other platforms, but yet another kind of dynamic where it looks like the Democratic challenger is going to outspend the Republican in a sleeper race. Not a surprise anymore because we're talking about it, but it's not one that's right in the center of the battlefield.
Right. Lastly, California 45. I mean, I've been telling people all along, weirdly, that these are New York and California are not swing states at the presidential level or the statewide level. The Senate races are laughers. Gillibrand in New York and Schiff in California are likely going to be senators. Kamala Harris will likely win both states pretty easily. But the majority in the House goes through New York, particularly Long Island and the Hudson Valley, where Republicans flipped seats in 2022, and then in LA and its suburbs, mostly its suburbs in Orange County, and San Diego, that sort of Southern California area, because those are the seats that Republicans started chipping away in 2020, and then kind of finished the job in 2022, and that's where the majority is. Let's talk specifically about California 45, where Michelle Steele, Republican, has got a real race on her hands, and again,
so this is
unstable.
Right, one of a handful of Orange County, almost a handful of Orange County races that are competitive. In Orange County being fascinating in its own right, being used to be the red dot in a blue state of California, but long time for generations Republican stronghold until Trump showed up on the scene. It did not want Trump and went for Clinton. And then, and now we're kind of seeing where is Orange County, because right now we're seeing that Vice President Kamala Harris is running better in Orange County than she is in some of the Northern California, more rural Central Valley area. And that is helping the Democratic nominee, Derek Tran. He is also a Vietnamese American in a district with a significant Vietnamese population. Mm-hmm. One of the challenges that we're seeing, one of the instability of this race is that Republicans are skeptical of Democratic polling that shows Tran running even with Steele because they don't believe that they are correctly polling the Vietnamese community and getting all kind of aspects and ranges of the Vietnamese community. Democrats think Derek Tran's doing very well, within that group. And I think that is leading to this instability or this disagreement on the structure of the race as we head into the final weeks.
Yeah. Well, Nathan, thank you for making things even more unstable than they were before this podcast.
This is the time of the cycle, Jason, where I start to have, this is really going to bring confidence to your listeners, that I start to have these moments of freak out. Like, what if it's all wrong? Like, what if, but we just have to, I still believe in the data, even if it's imperfect, like just go where the data lead. But right now it's leading to many close races up and down the ballot. And so we'll see if we get any more clarity before we actually get to November 5th.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when people knew that, I was like, I'd meet people casually in Arizona. I was out there for a few days with tending to some family stuff. And when they said like, oh, it must be so exciting to be in DC right now. And I'm like, sure, exciting if you want to like basically like, destroy the mouth guard you wear at night because you're grinding your teeth or you really like, it's exciting if you really like digestive problems brought on by stress. This is really an intense time. It also feels more intense even than the last two. I know that maybe memory does not serve me totally well, but it feels more intense and it feels more unstable than it did, 4 years ago and 8 years ago.
Right. I mean, the majorities are on the line, but I think anytime you add Trump into the mix, it just magnifies everything, and
Magnifies?
it's just everything
So
everything is more intense than when he's just turn it up to 11. I guess if we're gonna go Spinal Tap on this.
All right. Well, Nathan, thanks again for talking about this. I appreciate it, and let's. Just a few more days a couple more weeks and a half. And then we're at election day and then we'll see.
Don't rush it. I'm just trying to get through each day at this point. So we'll talk soon.
All right. Talk to you later.